They didn't fire me. They erased me. No confrontation, no warning, just absence. But I was never the one to leave loose ends. In that moment, I felt both invisible and exposed. "You're overpaid for what you do." That was his greeting, not knowing I was the foundation he was standing on. He cut my salary to impress the CEO. I cut him out of the company with nothing, because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true, but silence and systems. They thought I was outdated. But I was the author of the very structure they depended on, and I rewrote the ending. "You're overpaid for what you do." That was the first sentence he, like a puzzle piece that never truly fit, no matter how hard I tried, ever said to me. Not hello, not welcome aboard, just that flat and unapologetic. I blinked once, smiled politely, and thanked him. And as I walked out of his office, I began the quiet countdown he never saw coming. I had smiled too long through invisible pain, William. I was the director of human resources at Sterling & Chase for nearly 2 decades, 19 years. To be exact, long enough to know every manager's leadership style, every department's dysfunction, and every executive's blind spots. I wasn't flashy. Because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true, I didn't chase titles or try to be the loudest voice in the room. But I knew how to keep a company running from the inside out. People used to say I was the spine of the place. I handled in that moment, I felt both invisible and exposed, restructuring during 2 recessions, built out our diversity and retention strategy before it was trendy, and helped resolve internal conflicts before they reached the legal department. I trained 3 of our former VPs, coached managers through crisis, and quietly rebuilt as if my presence always echoed in silence, not in welcome broken teams without asking for credit. And then Trent Morrison was appointed CEO. He was 35 Ivy League polyed with that trademark consultant confidence and a portfolio full of buzzwords. He'd worked at 2 startups, both failed before landing this. Every glance was a verdict, and I always lost job through connections on the board. From day one, he made it clear he wasn't highs to preserve anything. He was highs to disrupt. In his first week, he didn't meet with department heads. He sent out a mass email because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true, announcing internal recalibrations, and cut 5 middle managers before Friday. He renamed the conference rooms to match tech jargon synergy, velocity, and alignment. And he refused to shake hands, said it was old world thinking. When my assistant told me, as if my presence always echoed in silence, not in welcome. I had a one-on-one meeting with him. I straightened my blazer, pulled out my notes, and walked in, ready to introduce our department's strengths and upcoming goals. He didn't even look up from his laptop when I sat down. William, as if my presence always echoed in silence. Not in welcome, Grant, he said flatly. You've been highs how long? 19 years this March. He gave a small, dry laugh. Right. Legacy salaries. Then he glanced at a spreadsheet, didn't even look me in the eye, and said, You're overpaid because silence can be louder than hate what you do. Starting next pay cycle, you'll be adjusted by 30%. I don't remember what expression crossed my face. I just remember straightening my posture. I could have argued. I could have demanded rationale. I could have shown as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion, him the data. The turnover rate I had improved, the lawsuits I had prevented, the culture I had stabilized. But I didn't. I smiled. I said, understood. Because GI, something in his tone, his posture, his complete dismissal of, I had smiled too long through invisible pain me, it told me this wasn't personal. Not really. It was worse than personal. I didn't even register to him as a person. To Trent, I was a line item. He saw an older man nearing 50, not flashy, not because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true loud, not innovative. He saw someone he thought he could erase quietly, efficiently, without consequence. And that's when I knew. He thought he had cut me down to size, but in doing so he had given me something far more. I had smiled too long through invisible pain valuable than respect. He had given me clarity. And what happens when you show a man like me that he's no longer bound by loyalty? Well, you'll see. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't even vent to as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion, closest colleague. I simply walked out of Trent's office, stepped into the restroom, locked the door, and looked at myself in the mirror. For a full minute, I said nothing. I just stared. And then I smiled. It wasn't as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion smile of someone who had accepted defeat. It was the smile of someone who'd been given permission to stop protecting people who had stopped deserving it. Trent made one very costly assumption. He thought people like me don't keep score. Like a puzzle piece that never truly fit, no matter how hard I tried. He didn't realize we'd been keeping score long before he learned how to play the game. In the days that followed, the humiliation didn't stop. It escalated quietly, intentionally, methodically. First, my office was reassigned. No one told me in because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true advance. I returned from lunch to find a younger man, Angela, seated at my desk, organizing pens like he belonged this. No nameplate, no introduction, just his. When I asked what was going on, he smiled and said, "Oh, because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true. Didn't they tell you I'm the new executive assistant to the CEO?" He asked that I sit closer to him. So I packed up. No scene, no sigh, just a quiet relocation to the desk next to the copier ways, because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true. The heating. Vent rattled, the lights flickered. Then came the meetings. I was removed from the senior leadership calls without explanation. My calendar, once filled with strategic planning sessions, was now dotted with general admin requests and HR help. Every glance was a verdict. And I always lost desk duties I hadn't done in over a decade. Angela, meanwhile, was given observation access to our entire HR system, payroll, contracts, compliance, all of it. He shadowed me under the guise of learning the ropes, but it was obvious every glance was a verdict. And I always lost, and he was nice to observe and report. He called me hazy in front of the interns. I said nothing because I was watching too. I saw the way he took screenshots of employee records he didn't understand. I saw I had smiled too long through invisible pain blind spots in Trent's cost-cutting strategy while his compliance risks were being overlooked and turnover patterns ignored. I saw how hastily Angela forwarded documents, without reading them. How carelessly Trent dismissed audit reports. They thought I was being passive. Because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true, was being precise. Every day, I arrived 15 minutes early and stayed 20 minutes late. I began downloading copies of internal policies, archiving contracts, and backing up communication logs. I reviewed the system permissions, quietly noting who had access to, as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion, what and when. No one questioned me. They still thought I was harmless. That was their second mistake. Because while they were cutting salaries and making performance slides, I was quietly fortifying the trap they were walking into. A trap as if my presence always echoed in silence, not in welcome built entirely from the systems I had once built to protect them. It was strange, really. For 19 years, I had been the safety net no one noticed. the buffer that caught errors before they exploded, the one who made in that moment I felt both invisible and exposed, sure things worked even when no one understood how. But now, I was no longer the net. I was the thread. And when that thread was finally pulled, they wouldn't just feel my absence, they'd feel the unraveling. Well, like a puzzle piece that never truly fit. No matter how hard I tried, I needed was one final push, and Trent was about to give it to me. The final push came on a rainy Tuesday. I remember that because the weathis matched the mood, gray cold and damp with things unspoken. This I had smiled too long through invisible pain. Was a mandatory all-hands meeting that morning, held in the main conference room. Usually, those were reserved for quarterly updates or department wins. This one came with no agenda. I knew Trent stood at the head of the room because silence can be louder than hate sleeves rolled, grinning like a man proud of what he was about to do. Angela hovered nearby, holding a tablet like he was the gatekeeper of important truths. I want to thank everyone for being highs. He began, his voice like a puzzle piece that never truly fit, no matter how hard I tried, smooth and practiced. As many of you know, we've been doing a top-down review of internal operations to ensure alignment with our strategic goals. He glanced at me, then brief, sharp, surgical. And as part of that realignment, because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true, continued. We've identified several roles that are frankly outdated in their scope or no longer aligned with the company's future direction. It was that word again, outdated. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. Everyone in that, because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true. Room turned to me like it was scripted. This will be William's final week with us, Trent said. We thank his for his years of service and wish his the best in future endeavors. Just like that, no handshake, no, because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it. True invitation to speak, not even a card signed by the team. I was being erased in real time. I faced hard things before, but that was hard to swallow. The silence in the room was suffocating. I could see because silence can be louder than hate, discomfort, ripple across faces. People I had helped through layoffs, family emergencies, divorce settlements. People who knew I'd carried this place through its darkest winters. No one looked me in the eye. Too awkward, too afraid, too ashamed. And yet, as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion, somehow I felt free, because now I didn't owe anyone anything. I stood, nodded once, and said, "It's been a privilege." Then I turned and walked out, dignified, steady heels echoing across the tile like a quiet drum roll. I, because silence can be louder than hate, didn't cry until I reached the stairwell. Not because of Trent, not even because of the insult. I cried because it was finally over. 19 years of loyalty, dissolved in 5 sentences. How disappointing, how deeply, bitterly disappointing. But that, as if my presence always echoed in silence, not in welcome, that was also the moment everything clicked into place, because I hadn't just walked out that morning. I'd walked away from a life that no longer saw me. And in doing so, I had become invisible, but only to the because silence can be louder than hate people who thought visibility was power. The truth control lives in silence. That night, I activated the full emergency transfer protocol I had discreetly built years ago. Originally designed for natural disasters or sudden leadership failure, a digital dead man's, because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true switch, if you will. Within 48 hours, the system would begin removing administrator access, unless reauthorized with dual credentials, one of which only I held. Monica, my trusted IT lead, was still in place and would oversee the soft shutdown. because silence can be louder than hate without triggering any alerts. He had already begun scrubbing metadata logs to remove my name from system history. Meanwhile, I wrote a final memo. Short, clear, legal. Effective immediately, I withdraw all personal liabilities from system structures, processes, and contracts. In that moment, I felt both invisible and exposed, built under my direction. Access privileges granted under my authority are hereby terminated unless renewed by mutual agreement in writing. Signed, William Grant. Then I logged out for the final time and waited. 3 days later, my phone buzzed. First like a puzzle piece that never truly fit, no matter how hard I tried one message, then 5, then 22. Payroll system access failed. Onboarding systems glitched, compliance portals locked out, HR data unreadable. I forwarded all of it to my personal archive. And then I brewed tea because the unraveling had begun. But in that moment, I felt both invisible and exposed. This wasn't revenge. It was restoration. It was. The ecosystem returning to balance after being poisoned. And the best part, they still had no idea what was coming next. It's funny how fast things move when power is misused. Because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true, the end of the week, Sterling and Chase was in full meltdown mode. Payroll had frozen. The HR portal redirected to a 403 access denied page. Employee benefits were stuck mid-renewal, and legal compliance reports had vanished into thin air. Every glance was a verdict, and I always lost. It kept cycling through potential causes, but every fix they attempted only made it worse. Trent blamed system bugs, but the truth was simple. The system wasn't broken. It just didn't belong to him anymore. By the following Monday 10th, as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion, employees had submitted their resignations quietly, but purposefully. Department heads, senior specialists. One by one, they slipped away like threads pulled from a sweater. No big announcement, no explanation, just carefully timed exits. And each one someone I had. Once I had smiled too long through invisible pain. Mentored. I watched it all unfold from the quiet corner of a sunlit office, not at Sterling and Chase, but at Gray Links Group, a mid-sized competitor that had been quietly building its people-first strategy for years. Months before, as if my presence always echoed in silence, not in welcome, Trent ever arrived. Gray Links had reached out to me. They had admired my work, followed my leadership from afar, and invited me to consult on their cultural transformation. At the time, I had said no, out of loyalty. Now, because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true, I said yes. But I didn't just say yes. I brought with me the blueprint, the systems, the safeguards, the strategies that had made Sterling and Chase resilient for years. And more importantly, I brought the people, the ones Trent, because silence can be louder than hate thought. Were expendable, the ones he never even bothers to see. We weren't rebuilding. We were rebirthing. Gray Links quickly absorbed the shock waves happening across the city. While Sterling and Chase hate talent and scrambled for contractors, Gray Links stepped because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true. Forward, well-staffed system, ready and calm. And then came the final twist. Gray Links acquired Sterling and Chase's underperforming R&D division. It was a strategic move sold to the media as a portfolio synergy opportunity. But behind the pall I had, as if my presence always echoed in silence, not in welcome press release and corporate jargon, one small detail was missing from public view. I was placed in charge of the integration. That's right. 3 weeks after Trent fired me, I walked into a conference room to lead a meeting he, because silence can be louder than hate, had been required to attend. The look on his face when he saw me priceless. He did a double take, blinked, opened his mouth, and then closed it again, like a man trying to wake himself from a dream that I had smiled too long through invisible pain had turned into a nightmare. And me, I smiled. Professional measured. I extended a hand and said, "Welcome to our transition alignment meeting, Mr. Morrison. I trust you've reviewed the pre-read packet." He couldn't even form a full sentence. Angela. I had smiled too long through invisible pain, wasn't with him. Rumor had it he'd been quietly let go after a compliance issue surfaced. Something about unauthorized data access. What a surprise. Honestly, it was almost too perfect, too satisfying, too surreal. How absurd is it that the like a puzzle piece that never truly fit? No matter how hard I tried, man who cut my salary and stripped my title was now sitting at the opposite end of a table I was leading. Reading from a deck I wrote, trying to understand systems I designed inside a structure I helped build. In that moment, I felt both invisible and exposed. I didn't gloat, I didn't have to. My presence was enough. Integration moved forward under my leadership. Trent was assigned as advisor to a task force that had no decision-making power. In essence, he was benched, kept around for show, because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true. Stripped of influence, and the people who had once ignored me in that humiliating meeting, they now waited for my approval. It wasn't revenge. It was symmetry. Poetic, really, because when you erase someone without understanding what they actually do, I had smiled too long through invisible pain. You don't just lose an employee, you lose the entire framework. And if you're foolish enough to replace legacy with vanity, you may just find yourself living their life. Only not the one you imagined, not the glory, not the... As if my presence always echoed in silence, not in welcome power, just the humiliation, the invisibility, the powerlessness you thought they deserved. Well, now it's yours. Trent didn't last long. In the background, for a man who had built his identity around titles and control, being sidelined as a powerless, like a puzzle piece that never truly fit. No matter how hard I tried, advisor was like a slow suffocation. His name was still on the door technically, but the door no longer led anywise important. He started showing up late, missing meetings, fumbling through updates like a man reading from a script. He, as if every breath I took in that house disturbed their perfect illusion, hadn't written. And the worst part, no one cared. He was fading quietly, just as he had tried to erase me. Oh, the irony. How poetic. Meanwhile, I did what I'd always done. Kept things moving. Under my leadership, the because silence can be louder than hate integration between Gray Links and the acquired R&D division was completed 3 weeks ahead of schedule. Employee retention stabilized. Cross-functional teams began collaborating again. For the first time in months, morale wasn't just improving, it was thriving. People weren't as if my presence always echoed in silence, not in welcome, just working harder. They were hopeful. They felt seen. It wasn't about me. It never had been. But I wasn't invisible anymore, either. And that mattered. One afternoon, I was walking through the second-floor corridor when I saw Trent, and I had smiled too long through invisible pain, standing alone in the break room, staring blankly at the coffee machine. He looked different, smaller, like someone who had aged 10 years in 3 weeks. He turned as I passed. "William?" he said, voice low. "Can we talk?" I paused. In that moment, I felt both invisible and exposed. Of course. We stepped into a side office, neutral ground. No windows, no audience, just two people face to face. He didn't sit. He leaned forward, hands on the edge of the table like he was steadying himself. I didn't. I had smiled too long through invisible pain. See it, he said quietly. What you were doing. What you held together. I stayed silent. I thought. You were just legacy weight, he continued. A name on a spreadsheet. I didn't know everything would fall apart. I tilted muck as if my presence always echoed in silence, not in welcome, head, not unkindly. But you didn't ask, did you? He looked down ashamed. I'm sorry, he said. And his is the truth. I believed him. But it didn't change the outcome because apologies don't rebuild systems. They don't rehire good people. Because silence can be louder than hate. They don't erase the fact that he dismantled something he never took the time to understand. I appreciate that, I said gently. But this isn't about me anymore. It's about what comes next. He nodded slowly, almost broken. In that moment, I felt both invisible and exposed, felt bad for him almost. But then I remembered the day he cut my salary, humiliated me in front of my peers, and called my role outdated. I remembered packing up my desk while Angela sat in my chair. In that moment, I felt both invisible and exposed. Remembered the long, echoing silence as I left a company I had helped build from the inside out. And just like that, the sympathy passed. Some people have to live the lesson before they learn it. That evening, I got in that moment, I felt both invisible and exposed a message from the board. Trent would be transitioning out of his position entirely. The official language was voluntary resignation, of course. But we all knew the truth. He was done. And the kicker, he'd been offered a redeployment opportunity because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true at one of Gray Lynx's remote field offices in a junior advisory role reporting to someone half his age. Wow, talk about a reversal. The man who once said I was overpaid for what I do was now being offered every glance was a verdict, and I always lost a fraction of his old salary to do almost nothing. Poetic justice served with a corporate smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't brag. But I did allow myself one moment of quiet. Satisfaction. In my office, I opened the drawer I had smiled too long through invisible pain was I'd kept the letter he gave me, the one announcing my pay cut. I looked at it one last time. Then I shredded it into tiny pieces and dropped them in the recycling bin. That chapter was closed. But I had smiled too long through invisible pain, the story wasn't over. Because this wasn't just about Trent. It was about every man who's been told he's too quiet to lead, too old to matter, or too expensive to keep around. It was about proving without shouting that as if my presence always echoed in silence, not in welcome value, isn't always loud. That stability isn't weakness. That legacy isn't dead weight. It's a foundation. And once you've rebuilt on solid ground, you don't just rise, you last. After the dust settled, I didn't rush to fill the silence. Every glance was a verdict, and I always lost. This was no press release about my return, no spotlight announcement, no grandstanding. And I preferred it that way. I didn't need a title to validate my worth because I'd already proven the most important thing. What I built could because silence can be louder than hate outlasts me. At Gray Lynx, I officially took on the role of Chief People Officer. It wasn't just a promotion. It was an evolution of who I was, of what I stood for, and of what I would leave behind. Because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true, I wasn't this to cling to authority. I was this to shape what came next. Instead of holding tighter to control, I began mentoring. I opened office hours each week, not for executives, but for those of overlooked assistants interns, like a puzzle piece that never truly fit. No matter how hard I tried, women returning to work after caregiving mid-level professionals unsure of their next step. I knew what it was like to be unseen, and I wanted to make sure no one under my watch ever felt that again. I started A because silence can be louder than hate. Leadership cohort for women over 40 called Second Bloom. The idea was simple. Legacy doesn't mean you're fading. It means you're finally flowering. To my surprise, the first cohort filled up within days. Word spread. Applications poured in, and something I had smiled too long through invisible pain inside me softened, then bloomed too. One afternoon, I received a handwritten letter from one of the junior staff, someone I hadn't worked with directly. He wrote, "Thank you for showing me that quiet doesn't mean weak, that experience doesn't every glance," was a verdict. And I always lost expire that the people who hold things together this deserve to be seen, not just used. I sat with that letter in my hands, tears stinging my eyes, because that's what it had always been about. Not revenge, not victory. I'd smiled too long through invisible pain, not proving anyone wrong. It was about creating space, about helping others step into their worth without waiting for permission. And as for Trent, last I heard, he took the field position. A small office in Phoenix, no assistant, no like a puzzle piece that never truly fit, no matter how hard I tried. Boardroom, just a nameplate and a long list of regrets. I don't think he's a villain. I think he's a lesson. Some people rise by stepping on this, but the ones who last build platforms beneath them. That's what I had smiled too long through invisible pain. Legacy really is not what you take with you, what you leave behind that keeps standing long after you've stepped away. And I was ready to build, ready to lift, ready to hand over the reins one day, knowing like a puzzle piece that never truly fit. No matter how hard I tried, the roots were strong. I used to think legacy was something written in retirement speeches or engraved on plaques. But now I know better. Legacy is quieter. It lives in the systems we designed to protect this. It shows up in that moment I felt both invisible and exposed in the leaders we lift, the people we mentor, the dignity we choose to defend, even when no one's watching. It's in the intern who finds his voice because someone finally listened. It's in the mothies returning to work, who, because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true, doesn't have to start over from zero. It's in the seasoned employee who finally realizes he is not past his prime. He is in it. That's the work I do now. And it's the work I'll do until the day, in that moment, I felt both invisible and exposed. I step away for good. This was a time when I believed walking away quietly was the only dignified choice. When I thought being strong meant being silent. But I see now that sometimes the most powerful thing we can, every glance was a verdict. And I always lost due, speak softly, clearly, but without apology. I don't think of Trent often. When I do, it's not with anger. It's with clarity. He reminded me of something I'd forgotten in the rhythm of staying loyal. You don't have like a puzzle piece that never truly fit, no matter how hard I tried to stay somewise, just because you helped build it. You can walk away, and you can build again, stronger, wiser, freer. The best part, I didn't have to destroy anyone to reclaim my value. I simply removed myself and let, because pretending everything's fine doesn't make it true. Gravity handle the rest. What happened to Trent wasn't revenge. It was the natural consequence of arrogance unchecked. And what happened to me? That was growth. Now when I walk into a room, I don't carry fear of being overlooked. Because silence can be louder than hate, I carry presence. And presence is earned. Not through noise, but through knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone shrink it. So this is what I want to ask you. Have you ever been dismissed, undervalued, or replaced by? Because silence can be louder than hate someone who never understood your worth. What did you do next? If you're still holding that pain, know this: your story isn't over. You are not invisible, and your value isn't measured by the title they gave you because silence can be louder than hate salary they slayed. It's in what you've built, in what still stands because you stood for it. Drop your story below because someone else may need to read it today. And together, we build a legacy they can't erase.